Thank you, Mitya, for the introduction. Yeah, there will be some correspondence between our presentation, I mean mine and Masha, and some of my heroes could be the heroes of her talk, but not only. Because I will start from from the beginning, in a way. So. Having become the chief energy resource for the world economy of the 20th and 21st centuries, oil also became a highly significant object of cultural reflection. Yet, while the material basis for the extraction and industrial processing of oil takes a relatively universal form, variations in its cultural processing are significantly more pronounced, resulting in products that differ among themselves to the point of utter contradiction. The cultural refining of oil that I'm talking about actually consists of the symbolic exchange that this energy resource can enter into. We are talking about an exchange between nature and society, material resources and social values, economic models and political regimes. The question is whether it's possible to discover in the history of oil production some local flow, which, however, at one time claimed to be universal, within which oil turned to society in some of its properties other than those which are translated into the pure language of the struggle for money and the endless expansion of consumption opportunities. It seems clear that the fundamental difference between communism and capitalism, socialist and liberal ideologies, planned and market economies, the Soviet system and bourgeois democracy could not fail to affect the meanings given to natural resources, and oil in particular, as they were woven into the network of corresponding social, political and ideological relations. In schematic terms, one can express that distinction between the emphasis on production and the emphasis on consumption, so that in the USSR extraction of socialist oil took the form more a metonymy for labor than a metaphor for capital. The history of Soviet and post-Soviet oil and the development of its fields shows flexible and reversible correlation between the oil base and the social political superstructure, in Marxist terms, I mean, of course, generating different effects which were dialectically combined elements of the oil course, combined elements of the oil course logic and the logic of petromodernity, liberal and neoliberal values of consumption with the global and optimistic horizon of its endless growth and conservative orientation to the past, national tradition and securitization of the borders. It seems that the reason for these intervenings and dialectical contradictions is connected with the exchange between two social-political systems in which late Soviet and post-Soviet oil was actively involved, as well as the logic of war and peace, which has always been the defining framework of this exchange. So I will start it from the dialectic of Soviet oil. Soviet oil provided the energy flows necessary for socialist transformation. In the Soviet era, it acted as productive force that transformed the prehistoric past into the historic present of socialism under construction, and according to the most radical perspective, into the most historical future of communism. During the Soviet period, natural resources were understood not primarily in terms of exploitation, but as repositories of liberation and transformation. In 1927, the State Commission for the Registry of Available Extractable Resources was founded. It was founded in order to establish a unified system for evaluating potential energy sources capable of fueling industrial modernization. In this type of energy imagination, we may see some structural homology with the Marxist terms of base and superstructure. Geological depth, base, and plant economy, the program of industrialization, superstructure, became links within a single dialectical chain of transformations. The dynamic potentials of natural resources as productive forces incorporated into socialist relations of production. In 1930, the State Institute of Oil and the State Scientific Technical Oil Press were founded in Moscow. In 1932, that press, publishing house, published the general work of Professor Ivan Gubkin, maybe the key figure of Soviet geology and precisely oil geology, which titled The Doctrine of Oil. This book poses not only questions of geological character relating to prospecting and the development of oil deposits, but also describes in detail the mechanisms of the generation of oil. The genealogy of oil, he revealed, inscribes it into general process of evolution, of transition from the organic, so prehistoric plants and microorganisms, to the inorganic, chemical compounds, oil, which thereafter must be transformed into the goods of rational social life. In this manner, oil is presented not only as one of the most important energy resources, but also as a symbolic shifter, which dialectically combines the processes of prehistoric natural development and the movements of human history. This is the quotation from the introduction to this book, but I skip it because you have an opportunity to read it on the screen. The discovery of extraordinary rich oil fields in Western Siberia at the turn of the 50s and 60s, and the oil embargo that Arabian countries imposed on Western economies after the Yom Kippur War in 1973 became fundamental structural factors that changed the role of oil not only in the Soviet economy, but in the Soviet system as a whole. The subsequent political decision to fundamentally increase the share of exported oil and gas made it possible to stop the economic reforms that began in the late 60s. The sharp rise in oil prices on the global market allowed the conservative part of the communist leadership to block attempts to liberalize the economy and social practice as an inevitable step of such liberalization. The presence of hydrocarbon reserves generated across the far reaches of geological time made it possible to postpone into the future all structural social economic reforms, compensating the technological backwardness, low labor productivity, commodity shortages, and poor coordination of the Soviet economy's administrative apparatus at the expense of the wealth accumulated by nature. The transformation of the macroeconomic functionality of oil in the Soviet economy can be described as follows. Until the end of 1960s, beginning 1970s, Soviet oil produced the energy that fueled the development of the socialist industrial economy, which was forging ahead in consonance with global economic trends. However, from the beginning of the 1970s onwards, the situation underwent change. Within the framework of these changed coordinates, the structural significance of oil in the Soviet economic system began to change as well. At the level of official economic discourse and the language of political propaganda, oil continued to be an element of the progressive energy dispositive of modernization, accelerated growth, and the breakthrough to the communist future. However, at the level of the economic and managerial practices of real socialism, it gradually lost its role as an energy resource for modernization, turning more and more into a conservation lubricant that made it possible for an aging system to continue functioning without recourse to renovation and renewal. During this period, the cultural logic of late capitalism learned to refine the materiality of oil, moving within the network of capitalist market relations and neoliberal practices and values into a dynamic abstraction of finance capital, actualizing its physical features such as fluidity and chemical metamorphism, endowing them with magical linkage to wealth and the borderless nature of globalizing world. At the same time, in the USSR, extraction of socialist oil continued to be associated with heavy industry, standing on a par with the indicators for quantities of coal mined or steel and iron. Just as the Soviet petrochemical industry experienced difficulties in complex oil refining, requiring imported technologies in this connection, the cultural logic of late socialism saw in oil primarily its physical material essence, measured in millions of tons, rather than mobile streams of split molecules and virtual dollars entering into multiple social, technical, and chemical political assemblages and transactions. It was only that portion of Soviet oil that was sold on external capitalist markets that worked to introduce surrogate forms of post-industrial capitalist modernity into industrial socialist everyday life, allowing Soviet consumers to become acquainted with samples of its commercial outputs. The triumph of the oil and gas sector turned out to be a dialectical double of the fiasco of the socialist economy, not only the object of its conscious pride, but also its unconscious core, making possible the fulfillment of desires, geopolitical influence, military power, growth in everyday consumption, while hiding from the system itself the rather unmentionable and obscene real source of their implementation, the exchange of crude domestic natural resources for products produced by modern foreign industry, including modernized agriculture. Thus, through the exchange of Soviet oil, along with goods and technologies necessary for the reproduction and even strengthening of socialist geopolitical power, elements of petromodernity also penetrated into the USSR. The Soviet leadership provided its relationship with oil by means of mechanisms strikingly similar to those described by Sigmund Freud in his article Fetishism, 1927, where he designates this phenomenon via the concept of disavowal, Verleugnung. The work of these psychological mechanisms, according to Freud, boils down to the following. I quote, "I know very well that something is the case, but I perceive the situation and act as though it is not so." Yeah? In this sense, the oil and gas complex of the Soviet economy may be taken as such not only in the industrial, but also in the psychoanalytic sense complex. Yeah? In other words, this was a conglomeration of interconnected, affectively colored, partly conscious, partly unconscious elements, imperative ideas, notions, fantasies, which determined the general vector of the late Soviet economy's work. Oil became both a conscious external goal towards which the Communist Party oriented the industry in question, and an internal condition of the functioning of the collective psyche of the entire late Soviet economy. party leadership was well aware that the economic condition of the country was increasingly fundamentally dependent on the volume of oil produced and demanded from oil workers, more and more millions of tons of this substance that could be exchanged for consumer goods and food that Soviet industry and agriculture could not produce. At the same time, the leadership acted on the basis of the conviction that the socio-economic model that had been created in the USSR was the most progressive and advanced in the world. Soviet society continued to strike out on the path into outer space, denying the fact that its very existence was increasingly dependent on stores of oil hidden deep underground. The ideological grammar of the language spoken by this society was still focused on a radiant future, while denying that its everyday life, the praxis of its social speech, was provided by reserves derived from the dark past, concentrated in hydrocarbon resources. The greater the dependence of the socialist economy on oil produced in the Soviet geological depth, the more effort was required to deny this fact at the level of the officially articulated economic and political agenda. The more effort expended on repression of this recognition, the greater the volume of repressed energy accumulating in the unconscious of late Soviet culture and breaking through as symptoms of this repression. In consequence of the enormous pressure that drove ideas and conceptions regarding oil out of official political and economic discourse and into the social imaginary, the products of their cultural refining exploded the artistic and ideological norms of official Soviet culture, concentrating in themselves various forms of utopian, mystical, historiosophical, and metaphysical meanings. The reaction to these defensive mechanisms of denial was a practically inevitable symbolic fetishization and poetic mythologization of oil that can be observed not only in post-Soviet culture, but precisely in the late Soviet period. I'll give just two of the most striking examples. The first one, this is Andron Konchalovsky, born 1937, the son of the famous Soviet poet and author of the Soviet anthem, Sergei Mikhalkov. Konchalovsky graduated from the Institute of Cinematography, after which he immediately began a successful career as a film director. His path is the path of a representative of the Moscow golden youth of the Four era, oriented towards Western cultural patterns and consumer models. After he completed work on the film, which I will talk about, in 1980, he went to Hollywood, where he worked until the early 90s. In Hollywood, he made several films, among which the blockbusters Runaway Train with Jon Voight, and Eric Roberts, and also Tango and Cash with Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell. But in 1974, Andron Konchalovsky was proposed to make a movie about the oilmen of Western Siberia for the 25th Congress of the Communist Party. In response to this proposal, Konchalovsky made 4-episode epic film The Siberiade, which tells the story of oil exploration and the several Siberian generations searching for oil. Then the finale of this film links the oil field and the ancient cemetery under which the field is located. Moreover, along with the streams of burning oil, the resurrected ancestors rise from their graves. So this is the grave, this is the father of the main character who resurrected from the sea, from this burning grave. This is exactly what happens at the moment then oil, that is the condensed substance of the past, comes to the surface from the boils of the earth. So this is resurrected ancestors of all characters of this film. And along with it, the dead rise from the graves, which are also connected with the past condensed in the cemetery. Resurrection is achieved due to the fact that these two processes appear as connected with each other. The organic matter of the prehistoric past, oil, enters into synthesis with the organic matter of the historical past, dead bodies. The film, commissioned by the Soviet authorities, turned out to be a screen adaptation of the radical utopian, both revolutionary and hyper-conservative teaching of Russian philosopher Nikolai Fyodorov, the core of which consists of developing of technology for resurrecting the dead, all generations that have ever lived on Earth. The resultant synthesis of human nature and technology gives access to resources that extended the existence of the Soviet project for next 30 years and leads to victory over death. Soviet oil turns out to be yet another emanation of the philosophy of Russian cosmism, encoded in the film that was made for the Communist Party Congress and won a special prize in the Cannes Film Festival in 1979. Next example, Alexander Prokhanov. This is one of the Mashas here. He was born precisely in the same year, just 1 year after Andron Konchalovsky. In 1960, he graduated from the Aviation Institute in Moscow, but instead of a career as an engineer, he preferred the spiritual quest typical for the New Age. He worked as a forester in Karelia, took part in geological expeditions in eastern Siberia, was interested in yoga, Buddhism, and Orthodoxy. His movement to the center of late Soviet culture was the movement of a marginal, initially deprived of any cultural capital. However, by the mid-70s, he had become a very well-known journalist and author of several stories and novels permitted with the pathos of labor and Russian spirituality, to what he himself would later call the Soviet technospheric novel. As a journalist, he traveled extensively to third world hotspots to report on anti-colonialist wars in Africa, Latin America, and then Afghanistan. Since 1990s, Prokhanov has become a national patriot, the creator of the idea of the Fifth Empire, and ideologist of war who combine in the image of coming Red Easter. Not only technology and nature, machine and man, tradition and modernization, orthodoxy and Bolshevism, but also mysticism and militarism. The motive of oil appears in many Prokhanov's novels precisely in the 1970s. The main thesis of these novels is the description of technological invasion of nature as the release of its own internal organic potential, when the machine and nature discover their own subjectivity, entering into tense relations with each other. Prokhanov poetics overcomes the opposition of nature and civilization, the national spirit and the new modern industry, tradition and modernization, the past and the future. It is symptomatic that it is oil that becomes the substance that is capable of synthesizing and uniting these opposites into a single whole. As one of the heroes of his novel says, today, the national temperament, and so on and so forth. So oil turns out to be a matter that has condensed the natural, national, and cultural energy of the past. By developing it, a human being forms itself, at the same time returning to its source, located in the depth of the earth, transforming the organic matter of nature into energy that feeds a civilizational breakthrough into the future. His novels also often feature a motif that combines cemeteries and oil in a positive synthesis. I just quote from one of his novels. This was the antiquity of the 20th century, and I deified these mechanisms. But I felt, of course, that the oil refinery was not built in an empty place. It lay on a pagan temples, on cemeteries, on villages that had sunk under water. What is symptomatic for me is that to these cultural and ideological antipodes, such as Konchalovsky and Prokhanov, yeah, this is, I would say this is two images of late Soviet Petro masculinity. Yeah, this is Konchalovsky with Nastasia Kinsky during when he made his film Maria's Lover in the mid-80s, and this is Prokhanov in the same time during his business trip to Nicaragua. But there are completely similarity between them because both of them reveal the same structural and unconscious core characteristic for the late Soviet economy and culture. Natural resources and the resources of national tradition, objectified in the image of deceased ancestors, lying in the ground, are united. Moreover, they united through the philosophy of common task, further philosophy of common task, Russian cosmism, the resurrection of the dead, the release of energy from the past. These are the most striking examples of how the discourse of petromodernization is embodied through conservative images of national tradition in late Soviet culture. But they can be found in many memoirs of Soviet oil workers, newspaper articles, and journalism. Traces of this conceptual link even became material for parody. Thus, a very popular Soviet comedy film by Leonid Gaidai, Kidnapping Caucasian Style, Kavkazская пленница, 1966, begins with a dialogue between the film main character, a student who has come to Caucasus for field practice, and the local hotel administrator. Yeah, he got purpose of visit, ethnographic expedition. I see. Are you looking for oil? Not quite. I'm looking for folklore. Yeah. Okay. Now I skip the second part of my talk. About post-Soviet condition and jumped to the conclusion, to the contemporary situation. Since the start of the war in Ukraine, we can see a dramatic change in the direction of Russian oil and gas flows. China and India are becoming the main consumer of Russian energy resources. In turn, Russia becomes totally dependent both on these energy supplies and on the goods and technologies that China sells to it. Russia's political dependence on China is becoming a fact recognized even by the Russian leadership. A symptomatic shift also occurs in the symbolic connection that interests us, connection between natural energy resources and cultural values, which official Russian discourse places at the basis of national identity. Recently, Putin actually admitted his vassal dependence on China when he cited as an ideal example the policy of the Russian Prince Alexander Nevsky in the 13th century. I quote Putin, he traveled to the Golden Horde, bowed to the horde Hans, received a label to reign, among other things, and primarily in order to effectively resist Western invasion. Why? Because the horde behaved arrogantly, cruelly, but they didn't affect the main thing, our language, traditions, culture, which the Western conquerors claimed. Russian Orthodox Church reveres Alexander Nevsky as a saint precisely for this choice between the East, Golden Horde, and the West. As all of us know, Alexander Nevsky were victoriously fighting with German knights. In our perspective, the following conclusion can be drawn from this. Previously, since the 1970s, and especially in the last 2 decades, Soviet and Russian oil was exchanged not only for Western capital, Western goods and technologies, but also for Western cultural and political values. Together with dollars and euros received for oil, liberal democracy and LGBT penetrated into Russia. Now a new era of exchange with the East is beginning, when oil is exchanged exclusively for Chinese capital and goods that do not carry values that threatened the purity of Russian national tradition. So pure Chinese yuan received for crude Russian oil does not threaten the pure Russian spirit. Yeah, here this is a spot of crude Russian oil on Putin's cheeks, and this is pure Russian spirits. Yeah, in the second photo. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ilya. We have some time for questions, comments, remarks.
Thanks so much, Ilya, for this rich presentation. I have one very short question regarding the Sibir film. Could you show this image again where we see the graveyard and the well in the back?
This
one
or
the other
this?
one? This one, yeah, because I have to take a photo of that. And the reason is I think it's clearly also a quote of this Murnau film, The Burning Acre. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
Because it looks exactly the same. But this is not what I wanted to ask. I just wanted to capture it. I actually have 2 complicated questions. One is to the Soviet times, and it's I was wondering where you were talking about denial a lot and so on, and that actually much of the welfare and progress or whatever that was promised by this economy was then only partly given or to a very high price. And seen from the perspective of the brotherlands, especially from the perspective of the GDR, it's quite clear that it was a treason that happened at that time, because there was a big promise, of course, and this promise went that with Russian Soviet socialist oil, the brother countries could, expel themselves into a better modernity. And so all the GDR petrochemical industry in the late 1950s prepared to transition from lignite to Soviet oil, and the Druzhba pipeline was built and so on. And then, because of geopolitical reasons, the Soviet Union had to decide to draw back and actually didn't deliver. And so they had to fall back to lignite, which was, I would say, one of the reasons why the GDR crumbled. That was starting then, a crack. And I was wondering if this was in any way received and discussed or commented on or whatever in the Soviet society of that time. That it was not only about the Soviet Union itself, but of course the brotherlands were also affected to a very large degree. And my second question is about this obsession with that oil actually came from living beings. We know this discourse of dinosaurs, and you can also find it in the States, of course. There's still, for example, a petrol company who have the dinosaur in their logo and so on. I photographed it in LA, but I think it was much stronger in the Soviet Union. Oksana, for example, also told that she learned it at school that in Tumen, that they were actually walking over dinosaurs' graves. And as we know, that's just bullshit. It was plants and not animals. But now it was even former cultures, former ancestors. And I was wondering if you could tell a little bit more about this fascinating idea. It was also in Malotkin, you know, it's like it's showing up a couple of times, you know, in the talk before, you know, like also the blood.
Thank you for your question. They are really complicated and demand quite long answers, but I try to be short. Yes, indeed, there are two political economical frames through the lens of which we can express or depict the exchange between Soviet oil and outer around space. Yeah, this is the exchange between socialist oil and socialist countries. Yeah, and socialist oil and global capitalist market. Yes, indeed, I'm interested in this presentation in the second, maybe more radical frames of exchange, because this is exchange between two political economical models, yeah, between socialism and capitalism. Yes, indeed, there are a huge. Why I'm interested precisely on this type of exchange between USSR and the capitalist West, because this exchange was the subject of official denial. So this was a tension between a real exchange and its real economical reason, yeah, because USSR had needs in goods, technologies, and so on and so forth. Also, just money, money. But it was not on the official scene of political or cultural or economic discourse. On the official scene of this discourse was precisely the brotherhood exchange between USSR and DDR or Afghanistan or some other socialist countries or countries in the second world, because in this case Soviet oil plays the official and officially recognized role of the forces for modernization, yeah, for some modernist, progressivist movement to the future. So in this level, there is no any problems in Soviet oil. Yeah, Soviet oil still works as a productive force for socialist modernization inside USSR and around of it in this friendly socialist country of Eastern Bloc or in the Second World. But I think that the key problem of the late Soviet economy and late Soviet system, late Soviet culture is this tension between Soviet oil and capitalist market, because the real importance of this exchange was denied both in the in rational terms and unconscious psychological terms. It was repressed in the level of official discourse. That's why some symptoms of this unconscious repression was flown into the fields of late Soviet cultural production. And this is the step to your second question. I think that precisely because of this denial, my Soviet ancestors was so obsessed with this image or symbolic topos of oil as a substance of the past, both historic past of our history, tradition, our real ancestors, our real fathers and grandfathers who lived in the same territory, dead and buried in the ground, and now we utilize their energy and the material of their bodies and some values they produced in the past in the form of oil and gas in the perspective of material economy, or in the form of national patriotic values, which also were growing during the late Soviet era. Yeah? So this trend to national patriotic values, conservative values, also they're symptomatic for the late Soviet culture since the mid-70s. All this village prose and movement for defending cultural legacy and historical monuments and so forth and so on. I think this is the different levels of the same process. The interest to natural resources and the interest to the to defending of cultural legacy and so on and so forth. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great. My question maybe is a little bit adjacent to what you presented, so if there's no answer, it's fine. I'm wondering if there's a parallel imaginary around hydropower that might be interesting to put next to what you've described to us. I don't know if there is in either the Soviet times or post-Soviet era, but I know hydropower is a kind of interesting case in Russia, certainly, and especially in relation to the relationship to China as well, that might add a different twist to what you've been describing here. So I just wonder if you have anything to say about that, and if there is a similar kind of archive of hydrocultural representation that might be interesting to think alongside what you've showed us.
Brilliant question. Yes, of course, since the mid-20s, since the construction of Dniprovskaya hydroelectric station on Dnipro, there were a huge flow of cultural representation of hydropower production, and the revival of this cultural obsession, particular for hydropower. This revival was occurred during the Thaw era. Bratskaya gas in East Siberia on Yenisei river, and it was very important. Why it was very important for the Thaw era? Thaw era recognized itself as a repetition of the revolutionary project of the 20s. Yes, it was an attempt to reactualize the already petrified revolutionary energy of the previous era. So the hydropower looks not as a conservative material which is lays somewhere underground, and needs a lot of time for refining its nonetheless from the plants or from dinosaurs or from our fathers and grandfathers, but the forces of water and its flows and its very real, even on the level of visual imaginary. Yeah, it looks more revolutionary, more rapid. This is another temporality, yeah, which inscribed in this type of energy production. Also, this cultural representation combines the images of water flows and the image of dynamo machines which circulating and producing this revolutionary power. So it was much more about the future, yeah, and this revolutionary turbulence, more rather than to some historical, prehistoric past that we need to have for refining for some chemical or historical cultural processes which produce natural cultural resources in this case. And precisely the story or history of Western Siberia oil fields was very closely connected to another perspective of development of these territories, because there are two projects. One project concentrated on the utilization of oil deposits on this territory. And for a long time, Soviet geologists couldn't find oil fields in this territory. And it was another project of the territorial development of Western Siberia. This is a project of construction a series of hydropower station across the Ob river. Yeah? And in the mid-50s, precisely this project has advantage because in the mid-50s still there is no oil in this territory. So this war between different administrative ministries, yeah, in the Soviet government also took place in this field. And what is interesting that one of the reason from oil industry in their struggle to hydropower industry was that it is much more ecological than hydropower production, because a lot of territories would be flown with the water. Yeah. And this is very interesting to read some oil industry officials' reports about how the hydropower station in the Western Siberia completely destroy the very sensitive ecological system of this territory. But oil, this. Towers, yeah, and so on and so forth, will not produce any ecological threat to the land. So, first of all, oil is much more ecological resource than water, from this perspective.
Okay, well, we have still two questions. Let's collect them and keep it a bit short, and Ilya answer them together.
Heiner Banking. I really like this conference, and especially your section with Maria and you showing impressive photos and images. So this is really what's remembering me what we did for the Cultural City of Europe, Stockholm 98, where the main theme of the keynote was, it is drama we have to put forward to society to make them confront issues they tend to ignore. And there I want to go into one of this leverage or critical points. When the whole discussion started in my background, 88, with the UN Environment and Development Conference, in Hamburg, the Russian delegation was very much aware about global warming or rapid climate change. And they really say, this is not so bad. And then the conference president, who was also running the press conference, Professor Degen, said, yes, but what about rapid change? And what about permafrost? Mm-hmm. So how much do you want to really put these issues, the scales, proportions, consequences of this into the forefront to make it tangible so the public can be reached?
I am afraid that I have no answer right now for a question. I think that we are talking about too far perspectives of the reflection about this topic, and I'm not able to to combine it right now. Yeah, but I think we may talk during the lunch.
Well, it's a challenge for all of us.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Thanks. You talked about the dialectic between socialism and capitalism, but then there was also another one happening between conservatism and liberalism, though I might call it progressivism. And this is where the gender question came up, and at the end you mentioned the LGBTQ, or of course it's very anti-feminist. So I wondered, because of course each socialism and capitalism have both dimensions to them. So I wondered if you could reflect on this repression of the past. To what extent does that fuel a turn towards conservatism? And just this dialectic you're talking about, because China too, like I could say, is actually, I mean, it's not a socialist. It's capitalism with Chinese characteristics, but it's also very conservative. So how do you see this dialectic from a Russian perspective?
Okay, maybe I will consider.
We can also talk at lunch if it's too long.
Maybe I just start to answer to your question, and then we follow up with discussion after the section. I think we might observe how during last decades in Russia, I mean from the 2000s, from this Putin's stabilization and the growth of wealth in Russian society, precisely because the oil prices, during the at least first decade of 2000, there are a lot of, I would say, neoliberal enthusiasm in Russian society, especially on the high level of Russian society in big cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other big cities, where this exchange between Russian oil and Western capital, along with Western values, consumption values and values of neoliberal identity politics was a common sense, common ground for Russian society during 2000 and maybe before 2014, before Crimea annexation. But in the same time, there are very vivid and peaceful coexistence between contemporary Russian postmodernist culture, like Pelevin, Sorokin, and a lot of authors, and their lifestyle in the big Russian cities, not only in the capitals. From the one hand, and from another, gradually, step by step, growing official discourse of oil and gas industries and state corporate companies like Gazprom and Rosneft, which elaborated the discourse which combines the same levels, oil and gas, and Russian national cultural values. Yeah, for example, there are very well-known logo or motto, advertisement motto of Gazprom. Gazprom is a Russian national legacy, as well as cultural legacy. So I would say that firstly it was just a mechanical correlation between contemporary neoliberal postmodern consumption and the conservative optics of oil and gas production, and then they will clash in more tense and dialectical way during last decade, since 2014. Yeah, but we need to to extend our conversation on this topic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ilya, and thanks to everyone for the questions and comments.